Hello, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Welcome to you wherever you are listening and whenever you're listening to us today, because this will be recorded. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here. I know Allie and I are super excited to get going. I am here in our last LinkedIn Live in a series with our special guest, Allie Knull. The K is not silent. We are going to be talking about going resume free. So if you are already here, please say hi. Join us in the chat. Oh, hello, Derek. Thank you so much for saying hi to us. Welcome. Very glad to have you here. And yes, please, everybody, feel free to drop and say a hello in the chat. Let each other know who you are and even why you're here, what you're hoping to learn from us today or hear from us today. Because we are going to be diving deep on one of the most biased and least effective, you heard me, least effective components of the traditional recruiting process, the resume, and very closely tied to it, the cover letter. So we're not just doing this because we woke up one day and thought, we should go resume free. No, we are here as recovering executive recruiters because we have seen how resumes actually hurt your goals of hiring great people and building an inclusive team. And we want to share with you a better way to recruit. So who are we? And why are we such ridiculously ambitious anti-resumers? Sorry, I was trying to tie that with anti-vaxxers, but I don't think that really worked out well. Oh, sorry, this is what I was trying to do. And I think I messed that up. I did mess that up. Okay, that's fine. We'll just go with our names. Hi, I am Rosie Young. I'm your host and I'm a Jedi coach, and I'm coming to you live today from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is colonized land, and it's also known as Toronto, Canada, which is home today to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Turtle Island. I'm not Indigenous, I'm Chinese, and I have been learning from Indigenous friends and communities just how much we need to go beyond diversity and diversifying corporate workplaces to actually decolonizing them. So one way that I am trying to take action towards this is as a Jedi coach. Jedi stands for justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion. So I'm here to help people with privilege dismantle systemic inequity while helping people without privilege survive it. But I haven't always done this work. In fact, I started my career over 20 years ago as a chartered professional accountant in one of the big 4 accounting firms. Then I became an executive recruiter. Then I became a certified HR leader. And then I left for-profit entirely to be an executive in the not-for-profit sector. I have been hired, fired, promoted, rejected, and done it all on the other side as a manager of people and an HR business partner. And it was all of these experiences, plus my research with marginalized job candidates, which I shared about last week, that compelled me to put this webinar series together. So as I mentioned, this is wrapping up a series of 4, and you can watch all of the previous recordings as well as today's when it's up on my website. That was what I was trying to show. That's this one. After this is all over, so you can just head over there under changinglenses.ca, resources, the resources menu, and training videos. Last week, we talked about how the recruiting practices that we have been indoctrinated with, this is what we've been trained in school, what we've been trained in the workplace to do. It's often referred to as the war for talent, but it ends up being more of a war on talent. And I summarized the experiences of racialized job seekers that I interviewed into these common themes. They felt the cone of silence. They felt the gated community effect. There were hypocritical job descriptions that didn't say what they meant and didn't do what they said. And they felt a very heavy, unequal burden of proof and an unequal distribution of power. All of which ultimately result in these internalized messages of low self-esteem, unworthiness, and even depression and anxiety. So all of this happens even without touching what we're going to be talking about today, which is arguably the most harmful element, candidate resumes. Now, last week I started introducing what I'm calling the TW, or the trigger warning, because before I introduce our guest, and she's going to explain much more about this whole thing with resumes in much better detail, but I have a very empathetic trigger warning that I want to give you, because the way that we've been ingrained or the way that we have been using resumes is so ingrained in us that it might actually be really hard for you to imagine any other way of recruiting. And that's totally understandable. In fact, when I was building my radically reimagined recruiting program, I was doing some research with recruiters, and I asked one executive recruiter how they would go about recruiting if they were the first person in the world to do it. And they got to invent any method that they wanted to hire people. And that executive recruiter said that they honestly couldn't think of any other way to hire other than how we do it now. So as you're listening to Allie and I, if you feel incredulous or skeptical, totally okay, very understandable. Your feelings are valid because they're your feelings. I do ask that you do some self-awareness and inner work so that you recognize what your first reaction and response is. And if it is to reject what you hear or be skeptical or cynical, please take note of that. Ask yourself why. What's your rationale? What are you feeling? Why you're reacting that way? Because before COVID happened, a lot of the ways that we are working right now were considered ludicrous and impossible, and we could never do it that way by the smartest business leaders, but we somehow managed to do it. So for purposes of today's webinar, I just ask that you recognize your response and emotions and lay them aside, even temporarily, so that you can be fully present here with us and really hear what we're trying to say. You don't have to agree, just asking you to be open to an alternative. Because frankly, the way we've been working isn't working. And it definitely is not Jedi. It is not just, equitable, decolonized, or inclusive. So, okay, enough of my preaching. I'm quickly checking the comments because we are absolutely want to hear from you. We will have time at the end for questions. So as we go, drop your questions in and we will come back to the comments at the end to answer as much as we can. But it is time to give you a break from my voice and finally hear from somebody else. So Allie Knull, the founder and CEO of Resume Free, is proudly based in Edmonton, Alberta. She has spent a passionate 20-year career in talent management. And she is, among many certifications and accolades, is a top recruiter in Canada, Top Recruiter in Canada 2019 award winner, placing 10th overall. So, Allie, I would love for them to hear your voice and let you introduce yourself and share a little bit more about you.
For sure. Thanks, Rosie. First off, I should say that I am a settler's grandchild. I come from Eastern European and Northern European descent, and my grandparents were actually offered land that was not theirs to come and work for the resources, so in coal and in farmland. So I am proudly from Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territories, and I currently live in Beaver Hills House, which is also known as Edmonton. And from my history, like Rosie said, I've got about 20 years experience in recruitment. Unfortunately, that comes from all sides of the table. So just like Rosie said, hired, fired, promoted, demoted, moved around. I've worked with top employers in Canada, and I've worked with businesses that are just hiring their first person. So my most recent passion has been helping small business owners identify ways to do recruitment that suits their needs, especially because right now, the war on talent, it's not a war. It's not a war. We're not competing for resources there. We're trying to find the best fit for our companies. And I work side by side with the employers, with the hiring managers to help them find top talent. And that kind of parlayed into, the ever-present question for the last 8-9 years, what if we could do this without a resume? And so that question I got to explore in more detail starting in 2019 when I incorporated Resume Free without really a plan on how to do so. Just knowing that it was something that was going to come to fruition. And here we are almost 3 years later, one pandemic later. Can I say that? Are we almost done? I don't know.
Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it.
I won't. But learning and exploring and building and smashing and pivoting and whatnot during the pandemic. And we found a way to do daily updates for employers on their candidates based on information that would be vital to the job. So the incumbent's success in the job, asking those questions ahead of looking at a resume, and also doing a soft skills assessment. So aligning talent with the environment in the organization. I don't want to say culture because that's not what we're hiring for. We're not doing culture. We're aligning environments. So how do they problem solve? What work environment works best for them? How is their communication? What type of communication do they prefer? And all these little nuances that you could never, ever get from a resume. We provide that data upfront before the interviews happen. And the best thing about our process is with our candidates that go through it, we give them something in return, which no other process right now does, especially when it comes to doing any type of assessment. You don't get your results. Those results just go over to the employer. We actually give each one of our candidates a report on their greatest strengths so that they can have something as, in their back pocket to talk about, that one question that everybody has. What are your strengths? And then what are your weaknesses? All of those wonderful questions that we should probably remix down the road. But yeah, so we are looking forward to a year of growth and looking forward to helping as many employers and candidates get matched as possible.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot in there, and we are going to start unpacking some of this and tying this back to the pitfalls of the current system and how there's a better way. Because it sounds to me like everything you're trying to do is a better way. And I should say for everybody who's listening here, this is about trying to help you as employers and hiring managers and recruiters to customize something for your process. I love Allie and I love Resume Free. But all due respect to you and with all love to you, Allie, this is not a specific pitch for Resume Free. It's not trying to say, employers, you need to go and hire Allie, blah, blah, blah. I think she's got a lot of value, but that is not actually the purpose of today. This is about showing how one organization through Allie has been doing it a different way because we recognize how the current system is really broken and perpetuates bias. So if I kind of go from there, like starting from that first principle, because you say something about how you even started your company, Allie, that I love. And I really want to yes, I didn't think of going that far, but I love that you went that far. You said before that you are absolutely disgusted with resumes. Please tell us, why are you so disgusted? That's a strong word. Why are you disgusted?
There's so many ways, and honestly, we don't have enough time to unpack all of that. But if I was to do like a grand, 20,000 foot view of it, resumes are the poorest indicator of somebody's likelihood to succeed in a role. The premise was based on people thinking that past experiences would parlay into future potential. And so that puts the person that reads the resume right in the middle of predictor or psychic for what would actually happen with this individual. And this comes from a place of my background. I switched industries. I switched from restaurant hospitality to banking to heavy industrial back to environmental sciences. And honestly, every single time that I took a leap of faith into a new industry, somebody took a chance on me. And it wasn't because of my resume, because my resume was poor. Very poor. It still is. It doesn't have a lot of meat to it. But when you look at what a resume is, it's supposed to be an autobiographical recount of everything that you've done in your career. But it has to fit on 2 pages. And it needs to be in Calibri or Arial font, and it needs to be size 12, and it needs to be left aligned, and it needs to be HTML focused so that it doesn't lose its formatting, or you better lock it down, or you better put it into a PDF. So there's all of these restrictions that we put into place. And then we take a step back. And really what I want to dive into today is that resumes are a statement of privilege. They come from a point of privilege where if you don't have the right education, you don't have a name that is pronounceable by the recruiter or hiring manager, you don't have a job title that matches what somebody's looking for, you are completely looked over. You're passed on when it comes to reviewing the resumes. And right now, it is the single source of a lot. I would almost say probably 90% of recruitment chooses a resume as a screening piece when really it should be used later on in the process. Yes.
So you're not saying throw resume free as in never ever use a resume.
I don't want people to get rid of resumes and rip them up and never use them, because there is a point that they need to come into play. And a lot of businesses, even, if they were going to be doing proposals with other businesses, Oh, did you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
If you were doing a proposal with another business, you need to have some sort of background to who you're going to be working with. So yes, they do need to see that you have the chops to do it. And again, it's in a resume. But to use it as a screening tool, we're basically judging how well somebody can recount information about their jobs and or regurgitate a job description and even try and like fit all of their information as best as possible. So we're basically judging them on their language skills in English. Well, let's take a look at this, because English is not the first language for everybody. You know, we've got two major languages, English and French, but then we have people that English might be a third, fourth, or fifth language. Who are we to say that their English is not correct? And then all of these biases come in when we're trying to sort through the resumes. We could go into detail about the biases too.
Well, I'm gonna tag onto something that you said, so it's a bit unplanned, but you're reminding me of all these things I've heard from genuinely good heart, like well-intentioned hiring managers, and one of them is, but our business language is English. And it's not just me, because I had an in-depth discussion with a very senior executive in an organization talking about the bias of typos and spelling mistakes. And we always, like, when people receive hundreds and thousands of resumes, and I know that recruiters, you do, then it's like, oh, as soon as you see typo, okay, well, that's it. And that's used as the screening because you have no other really effective evaluation criteria. And so someone with a typo gets thrown out, essentially. But when I was speaking to the senior executive, like, I know, I've been really trying to work on that for myself, to not just let it be about typos. But the fact is that our clients, like, it's not just us, our clients expect a certain standard. And I think that's also an assumption, perhaps, but also the bias of, well, it's not for us, it's for our clients, like the people who pay us. So I wonder what you think, Allie, about the whole, but if our language, our business language is English, shouldn't they have perfect English communication skills?
No, not at all.
Okay.
So the reason is Literacy Canada actually recently came up with a study that shows that 48% of all adults in Canada have a literacy level or an English language proficiency less than high school. That's almost half of Canadians have less than high school education. So now we're expecting them to have a professional business language on top of, like, they don't even know the difference between there and there, you know, or your and your. So I think what we're doing here is setting unrealistic expectations on what's happening in our area, in our country, versus what the literacy actually is. And then if you think of people coming from overseas, if they're, you know, in a permanent resident status, there's a certain language proficiency. That language proficiency is grade 9. It's not high school. So they need to have grade 9 level in order to be able to come into Canada and be a permanent resident. So now we're expecting people to have, you know, university level. And even talking about university, people aren't going to university as much as they did before because there's micro-credentials out there. So we're changing in the world of work and how we do work and perform it, but we're not changing the standards that we set a long time ago, archaic standards on how we select the best talent. So that's, yeah, there's so much to unpack there, but that's just the high level.
You're blowing my mind right now with the statistics you just quoted. And okay, so what I'm trying to take away, or what I'm taking away, just to try to parse this out for our listeners, is that even if you were Canadian, quote unquote, air quotes, as in born here, raised here, your parents and your grandparents were here, that the average literacy level, including born here Canadians and immigrant Canadians, is high school level or below. Average.
I'll put the link to my.
Okay, great. Yes, and yes, and I'll make sure I include that also somewhere on my, somehow when we record or share this, we'll do that. But yeah, please feel free to drop that in the comments there, Allie, so people can check it.
Sure.
That's I almost wonder then, how do we hire anybody? But I guess that's also why there's a booming industry of people who teach individuals how to write resumes and do resume proofing and all. I just feel like it's a game. Can we just be real and honest about how
Absolutely.
there's a game? And then it becomes the privilege of who can afford to pay for those individuals to write your resume for you or make it look pretty. Oh, okay.
And then you get this exceptional resume and the recruiters are all jazzed about it because it's the perfect person. And then the perfect person shows up and then it's not matching. There's a discrepancy between who's in front of them and what was written. And I'm not saying that, there's a deficiency between the two. It's just, it's different. The person's using different language or they're describing their work a little bit differently because, they say that there's no tone in words, but as a recruiter, well, there's certain things that we're able to see, like, especially, we can tell that one letter was italicized because we're trained to look for those discrepancies, to look for those typos. We will, again, the biases, our brains will find things that are different faster on other people than they'll find them on ourselves. So, scanning through resumes, we'll pick up those little errors, or I don't want to say errors, little nuances, let's say, on a resume, and we'll go, forget that. And I've even had to pump the brakes and go back to the employer and say, okay, how important is spelling for you right now? And if it's a graphic designer role, is this person supposed to be having proper English, or will there be a copywriter? Things like that to consider when, we have not quite the perfect resume. But is there ever a perfect resume? Have you seen one?
No. Other than my own, of course, right?
Oh, of course. Of course. I admit mine is garbage. It's so garbage.
Okay. Well, so actually, I have to share a story on that one. And this is a good example, I think, for people who are like, but no, I don't think we're biased against resumes, or doesn't. It's not just about the names. That's also what I want to highlight. That yes, typos, yes, names. But this is a real life example where I was doing a workshop and we used fake resumes to try to highlight to individuals what their own biases were towards the resumes that didn't necessarily have to do with anybody's name or sounding Black or sounding Indigenous or what have you. So I had one resume that was not a very experienced person for what that fake role was going to be, but it was nicely formatted. I had colors, and frankly, it was a bit, it wasn't necessary to be that nice. It looked like a graphic designer type of resume, and this was just for like an admin job in an organization. And I had another resume that wasn't nicely designed at all, had a few typos here and there, but the experience of that individual was better if you really read the content. Right. And when I shared it, then the comments back, when like people said, who is it? The comments back was that they liked the formatted resume. One executive hiring manager in that organization, in that workshop, so they liked the formatted resume because it showed the person's personality. And yes, thank you, Allie. The look on your face right now, I was like, what? Yes, I had this, like, how does a piece of paper, it has colors. So it just means that you liked what you saw on that person's resume. Another hiring manager could look at that resume and say, like, why is this so, like, why are you cluttering it up with these graphics and blocks and colors? Like, that's so unprofessional, right? We often hear it's so unprofessional for what we wanted. And if you remember, if you were here last week for my live, I talked about the stat that about 50% of new hires aren't successful within a year and a half. And that is from many different studies and quotes about that. So just think about the hiring manager who was impressed with the personality coming from this resume. And fair, it's just the screening part, so they hadn't got through the interview. But from the candidate side, many candidates have said that they don't feel the resume does actually represent who they really are, because how can 1 or 2 pages of a piece of paper actually represent the person? So here's on the one side, some employers are saying, oh, but I want to see their personality through the resume. And the candidate is saying, you will never be able to see who I really am through my resume. That's a huge disconnect. Huge disconnect.
Totally. And it's all subjective. And this is, part of my brain. So my background is actually in science, which blows a lot of people's minds, because I went to school to become a forensic toxicologist before CSI ever existed. So that's how old I am. But even then, the research that goes into it for a subjective process, my microphone keeps blipping off. the subjective process, the research that goes into how do we make our decisions and things like this is based on the psychology of things, our biases. And when we have the information about, here's somebody's personality, how do you determine it's their personality? Even, some of the personality tests that are out there, they don't really determine somebody's personality. They just tell you some generalizations about it, right? So I'd be really careful about saying that you get to know somebody by how they write something, unless they're writing opinion pieces all the time. That's not anything to base a hiring decision on. Again, coming back to it with the information of how can you determine this is the best person for the role based on 2 pages that you've smashed everything into. You need data. You need data that's confirmed. And recruitment, unfortunately, is probably one of the last business operations to actually put in data, verified data, to determine candidacy for roles. And that is where my science brain goes to is, well, this is the best person, but prove it. How do we prove it? And we're not going to prove it through a resume because, again, a resume is like a Coachella poster. You're talking about the greatest things up top, and there's the band that you want to go see on the main stage, but then you get down and then, it's all these little tiny bands. And then at the very bottom, it's like, oh, but I really want to see those people at the very bottom. And those people are the best I'll ever see ever for a stage performance. And that's the little pieces that we need to know at the very bottom is how well somebody can perform things. With my previous roles, I worked at a bank. I am not a banker, but yet even my HR professional friends would say, oh, here comes the banker. So we tend to get defined by where we were before and what our roles were. One of my roles, I was called the manager of client services or shared client services. That name doesn't mean anything to anyone, but I was able to manage a team of 75 individuals, which was the largest team in Alberta and Northwest Territories. And on that team, I specifically set out to have as many different language skills as possible. And we ended up with 28 different language skills on our team of 75 people. And that won me a diversity award. And I'm thinking, well, how is that getting me a diversity award? Because I intentionally wanted to service our clients that have these languages. And all I was doing was saying, what else do you have as a language? Great, English is great, but a lot of people weren't putting down their second, third, fourth, or fifth language skills on their resume. Why? Not enough room. It wasn't important. So if we bring that back to like 18 months down the road and we're still having issues with the person, or we're not having issues with the person, how do you say that resume is going to be the best indicator for that person? I'm still like, I can't connect the dots there at all. And this was my life. And I felt like something was missing. What am I missing here with this individual? So you need to dive deeper into the interviews, extend the interviews longer. And that's really, if we make a mistake screening a resume and we're interviewing the wrong people, how do we fix that? How do we screen better? Oh, you're on mute.
Why did I do that? Okay. Yes. Thank you. Talk about 3 years into a pandemic. You're still on mute. All right. I'm back. Thank you. We are now getting right into the heart of it. And I just want to encourage people again, if you're watching, if you're listening, and you do have questions, drop them into the comments. We're going to get to them after we finish our rants. I'll probably ask, or I'm going to ask some questions that may be coming up in people's minds now, because I know there is a better way. But I'm thinking that what might come up, because it would come up for me, is, well, but we'll figure that out. Isn't that what the interview is for, Allie? I mean, the resume, like you said, is just the screening part. But you're starting, everybody, I don't think candidates or recruiters enjoy the process as it is. It takes a lot of time for everybody, and we want to make this as efficient and effective as possible. So instead of the resume then, and well, not just instead of the resume, but you've pointed out what it is not telling us, or what it's telling us that we shouldn't be following. So what should recruiters and hiring managers be looking for in the screening process instead of what's just on a resume?
In the screening process, it's very important. Number one, even before the screening process, when you have a vacancy, you have to sit down and understand what the role is all about. and make sure that you've got the definitions of the requirements and make sure you've got the definitions of the responsibilities fully worked out. Number one. Number two, then you create an ideal candidate profile based on that. And so you're going to come up with the ideal person based on usually competencies. What do they have? What do they act like? How do they behave? And that's the question that I got to know when I was working with small business owners from the very beginning. When I say, okay, what kind of person are you looking for this role? It was never, I need a 4-year degree. I need I need somebody that's white. I need somebody that can go and talk to all the white communities. It was never that. It was always talking about behaviors and competencies and people that had experiences, and they have to be coachable, they have to be friendly, they have to be able to talk to strangers, things like that. They never would say, I need somebody that looks exactly like this person. I need somebody that acted exactly like the other person that was in this role. That was never something, because there's always a better person. So for screening purposes, I would say come up with that ideal candidate profile and then figure out a way to ask questions specifically around that, to how they will do the job, and like, can they do the job, and how will they do the job? Will they do it? And based on those behaviors, you can make, the cross references there. You're not doing the whole Suits thing. So Suits, I always reference it. It's the 8-season long TV show that was talking about a lawyer that didn't have a degree from Harvard. And the whole premise of the show is based on he didn't have a law degree from Harvard, and they only hired people from Harvard Law. And that one just bugs me. But it's such a joke to people that they made a mini-series, like it's 8 seasons long. Anyway.
And of course, they're all men too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
except
there was one female lead. Yeah.
Yes.
With that being said, though, there's better ways to make determinations rather than keyword searches, which a lot of us are. That's what we did. That's what we learned. And a lot of the new technology as well. So if you're looking into new technology that has the resume parsing, they'll parse the job description and then keyword match on the resumes. That's great. But you are just taking technology and adding it into the process that has always been around for recruiters. And you're doing it faster and not as well.
Okay, that is a really important point. I think I just want to pause here and let people take a note of that. Write that down if you need to, because I think that's what people start going to as well. If I get thousands and thousands, I'm going to do AI, I'm going to use algorithms, and that's all going to help my process. But you can design biases into, it's just a computer. It'll do what you tell it to do, right?
There's actually a study that was shown that they were trying to determine, again, the behaviors of people, of their ideal candidate profile. And they created it such that they only were able to bring in people that had they wanted somebody that was a golfer because it was business development, somebody this, that, and the other thing. And they ended up putting such parameters around the individual that they only ended up with young male white people applying or coming through, because they set the parameters for young white males to be added into the screening process. So we have to be very clear. And one of the questions, oh gosh, I was attending a great session. Oh, there you go.
This is the ideal candidate profile. Well, and this is weird, because I know this is not, I'm showing this. So if you can't see this, it's a picture screenshot of a Global Mail article. I showed this last week as well. The CEOs of the top TSX companies. So like the biggest Canadian companies. And this particular screenshot, there are pages and pages of it in the Globe and Mail, but this is all men and almost all white. There's a couple of people who are not white in here from appearance alone. And even the women, where there are a few women, like 11 out of 140, something like that. They are all white appearing as well. And that's where I put on my Jedi hat, Allie, when you say that, to create an ideal candidate profile is a good way we should be starting. And I understand the premise, and I agree it should be based on competencies, but I also see how, without ever saying we want a man, we want them to be white, we want them to be 50 years old if they're a CEO, whatever, it ends up being like that photo that we saw from the Globe and Mail. So how do we create an ideal candidate profile that doesn't end up looking like that photo screenshot where somehow we still end up with these white guys in these roles.
So, fun fact, there's more CEOs named Dave than there are females in the top 140.
I heard that too. It's like, wow, there's more Davids than men in CEO roles in Canada. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So when it comes to how do we change that, again, like with Janice, she has the Pink Elephant newsletter, and I was attending a session with her workplace DEI predictions for 2022. Amazing. I wholeheartedly suggest everybody to sign up for her newsletter because she has some amazing information there. There we go again. Every time that we were listening to that session that was put on by a friend of mine, one of the questions that she kept asking was, am I doing harm? And so that's what always needs to be present when you're coming up with that ideal candidate profile. And it's my job as a recruiter to say, does this pigeonhole the description too much? So again, coming from a place of privilege, do you need that education piece, or is there an equivalent that could be, available? I know, for example, that, my mother went and got a 4-year degree, and immediately after she graduated, a 2-year diploma was actually the preferred level of education for the specific role that she was going into. So I think there's a lot of information that we can actually, take a step back and say, is this necessary in order to be there? And then also ask, what potential or what amount of potential is the golden standard for what we want in this role? Because you're not going to find people, especially getting into the C-suite, you're not going to find people of, where they didn't have a place of privilege, or that barriers weren't removed for them, or there wasn't an ally or a mentor to help them get to that point. They will not have the same experiences as the rest of the candidates. So, there's that ameliorative piece that you need to put in there as well. Just because somebody doesn't have that experience, does that make them unqualified? Or if somebody has the experience, does that make them more qualified? So I think in the process, we still have that ameliorative piece that we need to think about to do change, to do real change, for sure.
Do you have a specific example about that? Like where maybe one of your clients you worked with and you're like, okay, that you helped them to see that something they thought was required wasn't really required.
Yeah, it was the education piece for sure. So this one particular employer, a great family success story, been in the city for, 15 years, really working forward, and they were growing in their sales department. And because their top salesperson had a Bachelor of Commerce, they wanted everybody else to have a Bachelor of Commerce. And I had to have a sit down, a face-to-face. Remember when those were around? And say, listen, is it important for this person to have a Bachelor of Commerce? And they would go, yes. And I go, why? Because if the only piece of information they have is because so-and-so has it and they're amazing, I then, peel back the layers and go, what about that person makes them a great salesperson? And then all of a sudden, the education component is not there. So I think one thing that we need to do is make sure that you have the right reasons for the right requirements, but then also ask, what are the requirements that you don't want? Or what are the things that you don't want in this person as well, to balance it out?
Interesting. So what would be an example of something that we don't want in the ideal candidate profile?
So, when it comes to, let's take, for example, a not-for-profit. So there's a not-for-profit group that is hiring. They wouldn't want somebody that wants, fast pay raises and, wants to move up the ladder, because those opportunities are not necessarily going to present themselves. So having a realistic conversation about, we might not be able to give you the opportunities here paid to move up and expand your skill set. However, we do have opportunities to take on volunteer positions within our organization to lead, outreach groups or, things like that, bringing the community together where you can test your leadership skills, but we won't be able to pay for those. and just be realistic about the expectations of the role and the advancement of the role, but not necessarily diminish the opportunities. Because even though they're not paid, there's always opportunities in different roles, which brings me back to the resume. Not all those opportunities are going to make it into the resume. So somebody could have a lot of these extracurricular, amazing experiences that make them who they are, and they're not going to be relevant on a resume.
Okay, so this is also where I love that you have a science background, and I know that you are very firmly rooted in. This is not just theory for you. Like, I know you've tested this, and that's why you came up with a better mousetrap, a better solution. So if we're not relying on resumes, and I also happen to believe in different types of assessments. Like, I follow the Enneagram. I've done Myers-Briggs. I don't love Myers-Briggs, but there's a lot of different psychometrics and tests and things like that out there. If we are not using, I'm not saying that people need to use like a certain type of test or personality thing, but what is a better way than a resume? Or how do people find out the information that you're saying we should know at the screening process?
So number one is ask questions. Make sure that you ask questions that are, again, rooted against the requirements of the job. Like, what are some of the responsibilities and what are the requirements? So for example, you don't necessarily want to hire an administrative assistant that doesn't know how to operate, Outlook or, Google Calendar or whatever. You want to have people that have some of the basic skills. I'm not saying that you need to dive into how would you solve this problem that happens on the job on a day-to-day basis. You just need to make sure that you're hitting like the minimum requirements. Are you able to work Monday to Friday? Are you, these hours, salary expectations? We might have to work in the office from time to time rather than work remotely. That's a huge one these days. So gathering that information that would make it easier decision, but not necessarily any pass-fail questions. Just to cull the list of candidates is, do you have a driver's license? Pass-fail. Well, what if I have reliable transportation that isn't requiring me to have a driver's license, right? Like, there's so many different things that you can ask for. And I would encourage people to think of questions that could be ranked or weighted in a questionnaire type of way, because that information, anytime you add scoring or metrics to data, you now have a better qualified and quantified information set. And so you can take that information and say, okay, based on this, the 10 candidates that I want to interview have to score a 90 or above. And a lot of people don't realize this, but there is an employment requirement by law to show, so people can challenge your decisions in screening, in recruitment process, for whether or not it was discriminatory. And if you have any type of scoring, you can say, thank you so much for your inquiry. Here is what we have. Here's where you scored. Here's where the people we interviewed scored. Do you have any further questions? And so you can actually back up your statement for, yes, this is the best hire, and here's why. So there's that piece to it too. Okay. Again, science brain. The one thing I would say about personality assessments or any type of assessments that you would do, number one, make sure it is it's been tested for adverse impact bias. I think that's one of the things that, again, coming back to that male lens, a lot of these assessments were made from a male lens and weren't challenged. Myers-Briggs type indicator, there's a whole story behind that. So I'll let everybody here just go on that journey. And there's a lot of reasons why a lot of us HR professionals don't like them. Just make sure the information that you're gathering has been tested, it's been researched, it's been peer researched, and that it's been challenged against any gender biases, neurodivergence biases, and also any racial biases. So adverse impact bias is huge to discovering all of this.
And just for anyone who doesn't know, what is adverse impact bias?
It's where you unintentionally remove people from the process based on certain qualifications that were like, if I was, again, that male lens, if I was only creating information on the male lens, well, I'm now disqualifying anybody that doesn't identify as male unintentionally. So that's the adverse impact. It's working against them rather than for them. in the statement.
And so there's just the reality, because this is also where why this year I decided I really need to focus on working from both ends of people want to genuinely become more equitable and inclusive, but meanwhile, change is slow, and the reality is the system sucks, and people are still feeling marginalized and discriminated against. So how are we helping them? So the reality is, because of our history of colonization and the white supremacy culture, that most of the stuff has been created from a white male lens, because those were the people in the positions to actually do the research and create the assessments. It's changing. It's not only white men either. I know there's a lot of women who have done this and a lot of racialized people, but the fact is the stuff that's Googleable probably is primarily going to be from that lens. And I know that you, because science background, you're not a white man, and you tried to come up with something. So what have you found, or what are you using, I guess, at this point, that tries to mitigate adverse impact bias in the way that you do your assessments for your clients?
So should I tell the assessment name for people so they can understand it?
Whatever,
Okay,
yes,
so,
whatever,
well, I encourage people to look under Google Scholar if you need to check for any of the assessments out there. I personally use Harrison Assessments. Again, my brain that comes from the science background, I vetted all of the different assessments back when I went forward with an assessment to say, here's the best people and here's why. Particularly because of a deception algorithm that they have. So again, from a resume perspective, we can't verify that information is true. Sorry, from the assessment perspective, we cannot, or resume perspective, we can't verify the information is true unless we have some way to vet the information through records of employment or anything else like that, or background checks, which are a whole nother mess. So for me, I wanted to see the scientific data behind the assessment, and with a deception algorithm that prevents people from trying to fudge the system, we can actually determine a reliability factor of every single person's score. And so we set our reliability factor up pretty high to encourage people to truthfully go through the process and give employers what they want. And basically, the assessment will stop people from going further if it doesn't hit the 83% threshold that we have minimum. There's some roles that go up to 86%, and those are in the manager level. But again, there's ways to find truthfulness. They've also done adverse impact bias research both on race and gender. Sorry, there's adverse impact bias research on race and gender. I am currently in the process to gather research funding to do one specifically around neurotypical versus neurodiverse individuals, as I'm very curious, and that's near and dear to my heart, to figure out how to determine if there's any adverse impact bias on that. So from that perspective, I think it's really important to do your research and make sure it aligns with what your ultimate goal is. And the other thing I'll add is that an assessment should not be the end all for everything. There should be it should be part of a total package for screening. It should not just be the one thing, especially because a lot of assessments will just come up with a label. And the last thing we want to do as Jedis is to add more labels into things. So, typically, yes, exactly. So I don't want to be recognized as a green or, a ESFJ or anything like that. It was really important for me not to have labels, and the assessment process that I use doesn't use labels. It actually uses data points. You're 93 out of 100 based on this formula. And the formulas come down to how frequent and how important those traits are.
Okay, so folks, I don't see any questions in the comments right now. If you do have them, please put them in. But because I don't see any questions, I'm just going to keep talking with Allie, because we could be going for hours and hours, as you can see. And I'm sure there's probably things where like, oh, tell me more about this, tell me more about that. But we just have the hour, and we can't possibly cover it all. But I do encourage you to reach out to us afterwards. And yeah, actually, why don't we share people how to do that, because I'm sure people probably have heard many meaningful things. As I mentioned, this will be recorded, so if you're here live, you'll get to watch it again. If you're watching this in the recording, then you already found the recording. But I will drop where's the links? I'll drop the links in the comments as well. Will I do that? Yes. Actually, I'll do that later, because first I want to just say, how can we get in touch with you, Allie? And I'm flashing across the screen. So Allie, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Because I can imagine people have so many more, just want to, engage you, get you to help them with the processes. How can they do that?
So goresumefree.com is the website where you can take a look. And I'm just going to put an asterisk next to that, because we are actually updating our website to be more user-friendly and actually have a beautiful interactive platform available. You are definitely, LinkedIn is my go-to. I'm on LinkedIn all day, every day. I find that I've curated my newsfeed to have some really great, interesting conversations. And so Allie Knull, Allie Knull is my handle, and I'm available. There you go. I'm available there. So usually LinkedIn is probably the best way to get me.
Perfect. Okay. So I've dropped those links to LinkedIn and to your website in the comments.
Awesome.
Please, thank you for being available. And that's how I actually met Allie as well. As I saw her, somebody talked about how great her process was. I'm like, I believe in going free from resumes. Allie, can we chat? And Allie's just so open and welcome. And she's been so gracious to even come on this today to share my passion and share her knowledge, her wealth of knowledge with you. If you want to get in touch with me afterwards, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, so feel free to shoot me a message, connect with me, follow me. You can also contact me directly through my website, and my email address is hello@changinglenses.ca, and the website that I'm on is changinglenses.ca, and all the recordings will be there under /training videos. So yes, I'll encourage you to please reach out to us. Allie, maybe again, I don't see any questions, so maybe you could leave us with some final words of wisdom. A couple of things. One, because we still live in this system of there's where we want to get to, and you've given us great ideas on how to do that. But in the meanwhile, people are still using resumes. Resumes are, and as you said yourself, we're not trying to get rid of resumes. That is just not the starting point and should not be relied on so heavily. But meanwhile, candidates looking for a job, they still got to put out the resume. It's still got to, be perfect punctuation, everything else. So do you have any advice for job seekers who are oftentimes, those are their disadvantages, how they can help counterbalance these biases and still use the resume to their advantage?
So I think the biggest tip that I can give for people, again, caveat, I hate resumes. I would say is don't let the recruiter assume. So this is the one place that people need to boast is on their resume. Tell me all of the great things that you've accomplished, because my job as a recruiter is to actually tell that information to the hiring manager. So if I get two resumes where one is just telling the job description, the other one saying increased budget, added extra revenue from that increased budget due to this, or implemented sales process brought in, X million more, things like that, those tangible pieces of information that show me that you've excelled at what you've done, that information is gold. It's absolute gold. That's what we want to tell the hiring managers. And the other thing to remember too is that a recruiter is the go-between. We're selling the company to you, and you're selling yourself to us, so we can go sell you to the hiring manager. So we're doing crossways sales, so to speak. So I always say, if you've done sales, you can be a recruiter. It's great. But definitely the only way that we can tell your story in the best possible light is for us to know. So don't let us assume, because as soon as there's not enough information, so that's one of the biases, not enough information or not enough meaning to the information. I don't know what your job requirements mean when it comes to how I'm supposed to fill this vacancy. Or we have too much information, so there's too many people that have applied and I have to go through like 300 applications today. We can't process, or we don't know what we need to remember from all the information. So again, if I've got those tangible, like, oh, you created 10 extra million in revenue based on your sales process, that's a speaking point. I can go tell that to a hiring manager. And then I'm just trying to think, what was the other one? Oh, we need to act fast. So hiring is always, it's a reactive type of thing. We're always, we needed this role filled yesterday. So we need to always act fast. And in recruitment right now, it is bonkers. It is so fast. People are getting jobs everywhere. So if you know a recruiter, give them a hug or, elbow bump or something. They need some support. Buy them a coffee, anything. But all this information that we're getting from the resumes, if we don't have enough meaning, we don't have the time to sit down and like actually get to know you and understand what you bring to the table. If we just have to go with our gut, and going with gut is subjective. And all of a sudden, we're not using the resume for its best purpose. So candidates always, get boastful, read it, and then get even more boastful. Put your ego out there in full force, and we will do our best to support you in talking to the hiring managers. So
that is excellent. And for anybody who, imposter syndrome has been talked about widely, especially on LinkedIn. Candidates, especially if you have felt marginalized and been told, oh, you're not worthy, or you've been rejected a million times, which is normal in the recruiting process. This is where it will feel very much like bragging, or can I really say that about myself? If you're feeling that, that's probably good. And you probably need to go even further of, I'm not saying lie. I'm saying really tell people that you have done a great job, because you have, and tell people what that great job is. So don't worry about feeling like, oh, it feels like I'm boasting, and maybe culturally that it doesn't feel good for you either. Yeah, this is where you got to do it, because this is the game that we're in. Remember, it's a game, and these are the rules. And if you're not doing it, somebody else is. So while we're living in this broken system, boast about yourself. It is not imposter syndrome. It is telling people what you are really great at, and that's the only way they're going to know in our current process. Okay, great. And on the employer side, Allie, I mean, we spent the entire hour talking about how bad resumes are. Other than not relying on resumes, which is our number one, what we want people to hear, any final parting words of advice on how employers can reduce that initial screening bias?
Add data, add metrics, anything that you can add in for scoring. For example, if the role needs like a PEng or a professional engineer role, does, EIT, engineering training, count? And is it less than? So a PEng is 5 points, a EIT is, 3 points, and then, a bachelor degree in engineering is like 1 point. Something like that, so that you're never disqualifying people without value. So there's always going to be value to whatever they bring, but the person with the most value, based on the points that you've had, a scoring matrix, have that scoring matrix ready to go, because as soon as you add in values, it's going to be so much clearer who is the best based on that information. That being said, we don't know that information is verified. So, I mean, like things like a PEng, you can totally verify, but right.
Yep. But that comes, that's where a proper check, not just, do they have some kind of criminal record, but a basic show me the certificate or the graduate degree or whatever, like that stuff is easily verified when the time comes. You'd hope that anyone is not a liar, and that is an automatic disqualification if they are. But yeah, I think those are the easier problems to solve, I would hope. Like last question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, there's actually a company that has a blockchain where people can put their credentials into the blockchain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's finally a good use of blockchain, I think. No bitterness here. I'm missing out on the on the crypto stuff. Something that does occur to me. This is my last thing. Somebody might be hearing you be like, okay, I'm kind of convinced, but I'm not going to be able to change my whole company. What could you how could you maybe give them a description to go back and say, this is why resumes are not so good, or this is why we need to change, like the summary of all the gold that you've given us already?
The summary of why you shouldn't use resumes?
I
would say
in a few words, Allie.
In a few words, well, To put it into perspective, there was a study done that asked people, do you know somebody that's lied on their resume? And 96% of people said, oh yeah, I know somebody that's lied on their resume. When they went back and asked the question again and again, so twice more, they actually found out that 56% of people lied on their resumes. And I don't know if that's full on embellishment of roles, careers,
Right.
what have you, but there's lies. And so I think you need to take the viewpoint that this information is not true unless verified. And there's more to a person than a resume. So gathering as much data as you can from those candidates will make not only a better hiring experience for the candidate, the one that actually gets hired and the ones that don't get hired, which creates a talent pipeline for you, because now you have silver medalists, as I like to call them, that are waiting in the wings just in case there's another role that opens up. And when you think about like employer branding, the better, the more time you spend with your candidates getting to know them, the better employer branding that you receive. So then you become an employer of choice, and people know about your company for its hiring process, not just how the business runs itself. So I think that more money needs to be spent in recruitment to do it actually well and do it good. And so making sure that you're doing good while you're doing your recruitment process, but doing it well, that we're not, again, making assumptions and making gut feelings or vibes. Like, I got a vibe, this person's good. Try and use as much data as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know we're at time, so I will leave it at that. I think there's a lot more we could say. I took from what you just said there, Allie, too, that the data, resume doesn't actually provide independent, verifiable, and reliable data. And we're all about data right now in business as well. And you've pointed out the importance of data. So employers, get your data in a different way. My last pitch, I'll say, is that you could do that by changing the way you ask for cover letters. Like, people are so confused about cover letters. Should I do a cover letter? Should I not? There's never any guidance. Some people never read cover letters, but ask the questions that you want to know and tell them to write that to you in their cover letter. And then that shows you how they communicate. It also gives them a chance to know, oh, this is what they really want to know about me. Then they can answer that in a pointed way. And you can actually start getting to, in the screening process, like early days, what it is that you really want candidates to communicate about themselves other than a generic resume. So one other idea I'll throw out there. Thank you, Allie, for being here today with us. Thank you so much. It's fun. I always have a lot of fun when I talk to you. So thank you. I will send out reminders with all your links and stuff like that. It is in the comments. Thank you, everybody who joined us live and who's watching this. If you enjoyed today's episode and the last 4 and you found some value out of that, feel free to buy me a bubble tea to support the work. This is completely just on me and Changing Lenses, bringing it to you because we think the message is so important. So if you want to continue to help support justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion, just click on the link. I'll put it in the chat as well, and you can buy me a bubble tea. So thanks, everyone. Thank you again, Allie, and have a great rest of your day.